Good afternoon, everyone. I am Maureen Mulligan, and I'm the chair of the American Bar Association Commission on Women in the Profession. And as many of you know, our mission is to do work to advance the position of women in the legal profession. And in that regard, we sponsor a significant amount of research, which we share with our constituents. And I'm really excited that we're here today to share our newest research project, leveraging grit and growth mindset to drive team success. It's really important that you all know that we never would have gotten to this point with the research project of team success using grit without the assistance of Dr. Milana Hogan. So the Commission on Women in the Profession has what we call the GRIT Project, which was really started and originated by Dr. Hogan and a former chair of the commission, Bobby Liebenberg. Dr. Hogan published her first book with the Commission on Women in the Profession called Grit, The Secret to Advancement in 2017. And then there's been a lot of discussion about how does grit apply to teams and what are gritty teams and what does that mean? So we, with a lot of gratitude to Dr. Hogan, who's been working with us for almost 10 years, or rather I should say she has brought her ideas to us. I don't want it to sound as if we've brought her into the fold and originated everything. This is Dr. Hogan's research. This was part of her dissertation. It's been part of something that she has been interested in for the last 10 or 12 years. And she has been gracious enough to share her ideas about how you bring the subject of grit to the practice of law. And in turn, the commission has run a number of seminars, webinars, and has had a number of publications about this topic. So I know you really want to get at it. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Hogan. She's currently the Chief Talent Officer at Sullivan and Cromwell, where she oversees the firm's talent management strategy, including assignments, mentoring, training, and career development programs, and performance evaluations, diversity inclusion initiatives, and lots of other things that create a very long paragraph. But let's just say she's passionate about the advancement of women in the profession and passionate about grit and gritty teams. She does a lot of volunteer work. She serves as a liaison to our commission, the Commission on Women in the Profession. And as I mentioned to you earlier, she served as a longtime chair of the ABA GRIT project. And she's currently the lead researcher on this research that we launched a few days ago, the report which we launched a few days ago, and which she's going to tell you about today. So let me start with a few just technical things about this particular webinar before I turn it over to Dr. Hogan and tell you how this is going to work. First, if you don't have yourself on mute, please do that. Put yourself in speaker view unless and until you're in a breakout room, just so we can allow for Dr. Hogan's presentation. She's going to put up some slides and walk through them with you. And how this is going to work is Dr. Hogan is going to give some background on her research, the research that's presented in the report, which if you haven't seen it yet, you can see on the ABA Commission on Women in the Professions website. It's posted on the website. And then we are incredibly thankful to have Wendy Sheba with us today, who is a former commissioner and lawyer extraordinaire, and she will be introduced later on in the program by Jin Wang, but she has agreed to go through one of the scenarios with Dr. Hogan to show you all how it works and how you can use the research that has been produced with some practical scenarios to have conversations with your colleagues about how to create a gritty team. This is an example of how you can use this kit and this research at your own place of work. And then finally, because we thought it was really important to make sure that our participants had some engagement with the material, we are going to for the last part of the program, break out into breakout rooms where we have very experienced grit facilitators, and you all will be able to talk about some of the scenarios and see how it works. And then we're going to report back to Milana at the end. So thank you all for being here. I don't want to delay any longer. I'm going to turn it over to Milana.
Thank you so much, Maureen, for that incredibly kind introduction. And I will say right back to you, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you and your support of these important issues and your willingness to give them the platform that the ABA Commission is in a position to provide. So I'm extremely grateful to you, as well as to Bobby Liebenberg, who gave me this little pin here, which says grit on it. In case you can't see it to wear for today, she is an initial supporter, as was Michelle Coleman Mays, who followed Bobby and under whose leadership we ultimately published the Grit book. So there is a long history of women supporting women here, which I really love and think makes this report even more special. So many people have put effort and time into it. So I'm so grateful. I am going to share some slides, which I will do right now. Can everybody see those slides? Hopefully someone give me a nod. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to jump right in the interest of time. As Maureen said, what I'm going to do is provide you with an overview of the findings of this report, and that will be maybe the first 20 minutes or so. And then for the remainder of the time that we have, we're going to go into the model that we are proposing, which will help you bring these concepts to your respective teams. So that will be the order of the presentation. This work in general is an offshoot or a part of, or falls under the umbrella of positive psychology, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It originated out of the University of Pennsylvania, but it's a very popular area of research right now. It looks at how we can achieve success by going to the people who are incredibly successful, going to the communities, going to the teams, as we did in this case, that are really thriving, and trying to determine what we can learn from them. So the idea is, if we know who's thriving, let's really study what approaches they're taking, and ideally we can learn from them. And so that's what we have done here. The first iteration of the grit research really focused on the individual, right? We were saying, are grit and growth mindset and engaging in those types of behaviors helpful for individual success? And the grit book and the grit toolkit that has existed for some time really, I think, establishes without a shadow of a doubt that yes, they are really important to individual success. Of course, we wanted to know, more specifically how that works. And here are just some of the findings. I'm not going to go through them all in the interest of time, but there are lots of important ways where grit and growth mindset are statistically connected to measures of success, including how somebody performs on an annual performance evaluation, the quality of the work they're given, the opportunities, the way in which they're perceived among others on their team. So lots of different important measures of success for individuals. So we knew all of that, but we wanted to also understand, does this matter in the team context, and can teams, just like individuals, operate in a gritty and growth mindset oriented way? And if they do, does that make the team more successful? And so we really wanted to undertake this research because we know that most lawyers work on teams most of the time, right? And so it is important that we all do what we can at an individual level, but it's also really important that we understand how to work together in the most effective way. So that was the origin of this research. That's what the report is focused on. In terms of survey design, we had two elements: a quantitative piece where we gathered data through a survey from May of 2021 through January of 2022. We gathered more than 518 responses. So it was, lots of different data points. And then we had a qualitative element as well from January until March of 2022. And we had one-on-one interviews, as well as larger focus groups where we really talked to people about these experiences and how they were playing out and some of the findings. And we were really able to add some very interesting color to the research, which is also what we're going to do when we get to the portion where Wendy has graciously agreed to share with us some of her reactions. So that's what really makes this research interesting, is the storytelling behind it and the lived experiences of people in these moments in time. So that was how we approached the research. In terms of participation, this is a quick snapshot of the race and ethnicity of the participants. So you can see some of that on the screen. This is all included in the report. And then in terms of gender, we had mostly women, 88% women. We did have some men who took the survey as well, which was helpful. That was different than the way we approached the initial research. So it does allow us to make some gender comparisons, which we'll do later in the findings. And you can see that data as well as a much deeper dive on all of these different criteria in terms of participation in the report itself. But the point was we were really trying to look at a diverse group, not only in terms of race and ethnicity and gender and other categories, but also in terms of practice area, tenure, seniority, how long you've been working, what your long-term career plans are. So we wanted to look at people who were in all different positions, doing different things, working for law firms, working in-house. We even looked at judges as well. We wanted to see, very broadly, how does this play out in each of these different environments? So this was a diverse group of respondents, both in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of their experiences and what they were bringing to the table when reacting to these topics. What we were looking for, initially was to establish whether gritty teams are in fact successful teams. Are they successful? And we wanted to ask the same question for growth mindset oriented teams. Do they perform better than a typical team, right? Is there a reason that we should be striving to have these characteristics? Can we actually establish some success? And then we looked at it the other way around, typical positive psychology, to say, well, let's look at successful teams and let's try to understand what types of behaviors they're engaging in and whether any of those are gritty and growth mindset oriented. So we sort of took a two-directional approach to try to answer some of these questions. And of course, if that was the case, how are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Can we replicate these behaviors? And the good news is that I think we can, and we'll talk about that at the end of the research. In terms of definitions, how did we define gritty team? It was a team that had a desire collectively to work hard, learn and improve, and was resilient and showed resilience in the face of setbacks, had a strong sense of priorities and purpose. And this definition comes from work that Angela Duckworth and others have done about gritty teams. In the growth mindset space, we defined it as a team where the leader, and this really needs to come from the top, makes it clear that everyone on the team can improve their skill set, and major setbacks are thought of as opportunities for learning rather than evidence of individual team members' shortcomings. So when a mistake happens, in other words, it's not, who can we blame? Who do we need to point the finger at? It's something happened from a process perspective, and we need to figure out how to improve the process. And everybody contributes to the process. In most cases, it's not just one individual. So looking at mistakes as a collective problem of the team that the team needs to collectively solve. And then a successful team, we defined, you can see at the bottom there, we define the successful team as a high performing team that achieves and produces excellent results. You can see that at the bottom there. When we looked at these measures of success and tried to find evidence of success on gritty teams, this is some of the evidence we found. There's more in the report. You'll see a deeper dive and you'll see the extent to which each of these showed up. But the ones on the screen are all 90%-ish or more, right? 90% of the people on gritty teams are experiencing these things or agree with these statements, right? So the team is delivering excellent service. Quality of work is excellent. That's obviously a sign that something isn't working well. Team members are learning from the experience. The work the team is doing is contributing to whatever overarching goals the organization or the firm has. Team members are still in contact with one another. I actually like this one quite a bit because it suggests that the experience was sticky to some extent, and there was a desire to continue those interactions outside of that team experience. All team members were treated with dignity and respect, and that's really critical, of course, for 100 reasons. And team members were encouraged to think creatively. All of these really strong measures of success, I think we can all agree that if you had teams who were doing all of these things, it would be a desirable outcome. On the growth mindset side, team members on growth mindset oriented teams were learning from past experiences. So when things did not go right, they used that as an opportunity to fix and to improve and to make changes going forward. Team members were able to anticipate challenges. They were good at withstanding difficult situations, quickly recovering from setbacks, resolving conflicts effectively, again, without making things personal. We talked about that on the earlier slide, that's really critical there, never making it personal. Supporting one another and making good use of available resources. And the last is, helped maintain health and wellness, which of course is a critical topic, has been throughout the pandemic, continues to be now. So this is some of the evidence, really strong evidence we saw. And again, these are all statistically significant connections between the existence of these traits, right? They're really highly likely to happen on gritty and growth mindset oriented teams, and all, of course, outcomes that we would want when we're describing team experiences. Interestingly, when we compared gritty growth mindset oriented teams to a typical high performing team, so a team, what I mean by that is a team that achieved good results, right? So it was a successful team. It was not a team that failed. It was a successful team. When you looked at that and you asked participants in the survey to rate their experiences on those teams, you can see a real jump on the gritty growth mindset oriented teams, right? So on the typical high performing team, about 20% had a very positive experience. But when you look at the gritty and growth mindset oriented teams, you see they were almost 3 times more likely to have this very positive experience, which is of course the experience that we would want anyone on any team to have. We would want that experience to be very positive. And I'll get into why later, but part of it is because it impacts whether they stay or they go ultimately, right? If we are interested in retaining women lawyers, which I know everyone on this call is, that is something that you're really going to want to look hard at, because you can really dramatically improve the quality of the experience on the teams. And then if you look down at the bottom of this chart here, for those who rated the experience very negative, there weren't many on a positive team or a successful team that would rate it very negatively, only 0.2%, but there were 0 on the gritty teams and 0 on the growth mindset oriented teams. And with this many data points, I think that's a pretty significant finding. You can really reduce any negativity. You can almost eliminate it as long as you're approaching teams in this way. So I think that's a great finding as well. Here is some of the color I mentioned from the live focus groups and interviews we had, looking at what does it feel like to be on a gritty and growth mindset oriented team. You can see here, I've highlighted a couple that stand out, feel like we could read each other's minds. It was a joy. It's not often that we hear people describe their lawyerly work as a joy, right? So this is wonderful feedback to get. People are leaning into their strengths. No need to tiptoe around. I love that. It suggests that people are bringing their whole selves to work, right? And they're just being who they are. They're not trying to, walk on eggshells or any of that. It was a well-oiled machine, which speaks to the function, right? So lots of really good feelings associated with positive teamwork. And the flip side, of course, also data coming out of the interviews that we did, is that a poor experience is the flip side of that, right? It's really very negative. Feel like I have to be perfect or I'll be ripped apart. I felt physically ill, no freedom, lack of autonomy, paralysis, inability to voice my thoughts. So lots of really negative things here that we know would not be good for somebody's mental health, or, certainly not an experience where you would have this and want to stay where you were, right? And the other thing that I think is very interesting about this is the physical element. So there were a lot of comments that really suggested that, people were short of breath, or they felt depressed or scared or ill, right? So there's a lot of physical response to this as well that I think was really interesting. It's terrible to be on a team that isn't performing well and that is stressful and not a good experience. I think everybody has probably been on one team in their career that was like this. I will tell you, in the interviews, people were not hard pressed to think of a negative team experience. So we know that these things are happening, and we know when they do, it is not good. So I previewed this a little bit for you earlier. Does your experience on teams influence your overall job satisfaction? And yes, it turns out that it does. It turns out that it's really highly influential for both the men and the women who participated in the survey. Women slightly more so. So 71% of the women said their team experience, or how those teams are going, whether that's going well or not well, is highly influential in terms of how they feel about their jobs. And it's important to men too. Again, maybe a little bit less so, but essentially important to everybody here. And then, to what extent is your experience on teams a priority in deciding whether to stay or go? So, you may have low job satisfaction, but maybe that won't make you actually quit or walk out the door. So we wanted to ask it in this direct way: to what extent is it a priority when you're making that decision? And you'll see here that for women, for 62, almost 63%, it was a high or essential priority in that decision making. Again, also important for men, but you see more of a difference here. So women are likely to react to negative team experiences by leaving more often than men, right? So we see, it is more intolerable, that experience for women, right? So again, nobody likes it, right? And it's going to be influential for all. So, even if you're not focused on women in particular as a retention strategy, this is helpful for everybody. And what is the impact on job satisfaction? Again, going back to the color, to the interviews, to talk about what that felt like. One person said it was 1,000% everything. I turned down a significant amount of money because I found out that I could not continue to work with a bad team. So, somebody was counter offered in this situation and said, I'm not going to say I'm going to take that new job that I have because I don't want to continue to work with this bad team. So, people making real life decisions on this basis. And then the flip side of that, of course, is this comment at the bottom, which is it's very, very hard to leave a good team. And a lot of times when you look at the research around why people stay or go, you will see that there is a lot that's centered on exactly that. If people like their team, sometimes they will stay, even if they don't love other elements about the job. If you can find a sticky team, you can find a sticky employee. So huge impact on job satisfaction. I think that's really important. When you sort of put this together, it's an interesting picture, right? So 2/3 of the respondents said they worked on teams at least 70% of the time. So most lawyers, most of the time. Of that 70%, 68 said that they spent more than 90% of their time working on teams, right? So lawyers work on teams a lot. I don't think that was any sort of groundbreaking finding, but when you marry it with the other findings, I think it suggests that we all need to be quite focused on this. We know that gritty teams are successful. I shared some of the evidence of that. We know that growth mindset-oriented teams are successful. And importantly, we know that respondents are 3 times more likely to have that very, very positive experience, the best experience they could have when they are on a gritty and growth mindset-oriented team versus a typical high-performing team. So you can still have successful teams. You can still have teams that produce good outcomes, but the people who are working on those teams are going to be a lot happier if you're running them in a gritty growth mindset oriented way and you're not sacrificing quality, right? You're still getting all those same benefits that we talked about earlier. And the experience that women have on teams has this huge influence, right? So 71% of women saying it's extremely influential, and then it also being a top priority, right? So putting this together, looking at all of it this way, it seems critical that we focus on trying to bring these traits to our teams to the extent that we can. When we looked at how often this happens, we found that it is more likely that people are on a gritty team, right, than a growth mindset oriented team. So 79, almost 80% of the people in the survey said that they had been on a gritty team, right? And that's just have you ever been a part of, right? That doesn't mean they're typically on them, but they had been on one. But only 44.6% said they had ever been on a growth mindset oriented team, right? And that's a pretty significant finding. So similar to what we found when we studied grit and growth mindset at the individual level, and we found that women lawyers tended to be a little less growth mindset oriented, we found that teams tend to be a little less growth mindset oriented in the legal profession. So that is certainly an area that I think suggests we need some additional focus there. So not enough. How often does this happen? Not enough, I think is an important conclusion. So given all of that, how can we make this happen more? There is a model as part of this research report that builds on work that Angela Duckworth has done out of the University of Pennsylvania. So she proposes a model, and then what we do is add to that model and try to make it more specific and contextual within the legal environment that we all operate. So the model has 5 prongs. It's interest, practice, purpose, hope, and safety and support. And in the remainder of our time, I'm going to talk about each of those prongs and give you some suggestions for how you might approach them. So starting with interest, the idea here is it is very difficult to engage in anything with the grit that it takes to be successful if you have no innate interest in that topic at all, right? So if there are people on your team who are showing an innate or natural interest, motivated by it doesn't matter what, you should take advantage of that if you can, right? So for example, if somebody says to you, I'm really interested in privacy law, and this particular assignment that we're working on does have an element of that, can I take that piece of it? The answer should be yes. And ideally, you will have some sense as a team leader of what the interests are of the members of your team. And you can proactively say, last week you mentioned an interest in this, and I'd love to give you this assignment and sort of pair the assignment with your interest, right? So if that naturally exists, take advantage of that, right? Because then you're going to have people ready to do this work. They're going to already have the motivation box checked, and you can get a lot out of that. On the other hand, you may not have people who are showing natural innate interest. That's sort of the perfect scenario where, oh, great, you're interested in this topic and I have work in this area, and now we're going to pair you up and it's wonderful, right? But it doesn't always work that way. So one of the things that I think team leaders should be doing consistently is thinking about themselves as a little bit of a salesperson when it comes to new assignments. So telling 5 stories, really trying to pitch the new assignment to people in a way that might help to spark interest. So maybe at the outset, the assignment does not seem interesting, but it is helpful if you can try to present it in a way that may appeal to people and in a little bit more deeply than perhaps you might otherwise have done. Please go review these documents, is not a particularly interesting or well-delivered instruction. If you try to be creative about why is it important that you review these documents and how do they relate to the bigger picture, and potentially we could find something really interesting here that could be the turning point, or I suspect there might be, or maybe there isn't, but we need to do a really thorough job to prevent risk. Or telling 5 stories is really about the idea that you don't know exactly what's going to spark their interest, so you want to present things in a broad way so that you might get lucky the more angles you take that something will resonate with a person that you're dealing with. Now, of course, this also assumes that you have unlimited time to present and deliver assignments. Of course, that's not true in all cases, but this is just a good strategy. If you do, it's good to invest that time up front because you want to take advantage of interest. The other thing you want to do is try to give people as much choice as possible. So we know from lots of research, not only this research, that when people are given choice and autonomy, they tend to perform much better. So if there are 2 assignments, you can let them choose A or B, right? And if there is, sometimes the choice is not about the nature of the work, but about when you do it or the order or any of those elements. So I am always looking when giving assignments to think, how can I make this as autonomous an experience as possible? How can I give you as much responsibility as I can while still maintaining the workflows that I need to maintain for this case, right? So choice is important, and being creative about how you're delivering and offering that. And then the last one is about matching the right assignments to the right people. One key element of grit and of continuing to stay in the game and push hard and persevere is that you want to do work that is hard enough that that you're pushing yourself and that you're in that stretch zone where you think, oh, this is just a little bit outside my comfort zone and I know I have to work hard, but not so hard that you panic and think you don't have it, right? So finding that right balance between work that is hard and pushes you to get better and really makes you think, but isn't so hard that you really don't think that you have it or that it feels like it would be a risk to the client, right? You don't want to do something that is too far along that spectrum. So that matching of the right assignment and the challenging nature of that assignment to the person who is ready for that challenge is really important. And as you'll see with all of these things, these are best done when you know your team members as well as possible, right? Or you are being deliberate about getting to know them. The more you know about them, the more specific you can be with interest, right? It requires some connectivity with team members. And for that reason, another strategy along these lines is if you don't have time to get to know them, or it's early on, and it's not that you haven't taken the time, but just no time has transpired, right? One good way is to ask them about interest, to give them a form and say, hey, check the box, all these areas that are of interest. let me know, and to somehow keep track of that so that you can do the matching in a little bit of a more formal way. So that's a possibility too. The second prong is practice. So interest is 1, practice is 2. You want to make sure that you are deliberately practicing together. And deliberate practice is a concept many of us are familiar with. It means practicing with the intent to improve specific components of a skill. So if I was training for a marathon, deliberate practice would not just be running, period. It would be certain kinds of running. If I'm going to run a hilly marathon course, I'm going to need to train on hills, right? I'm going to need to get used to that experience. If I'm going to run a course that's downhill, I should run a lot of downhill, right? And I'm not just going to run the same route every week, right? I'm going to switch that up. Sometimes I'm going to do a long run. Sometimes I'm going to do a shorter, faster run. Sometimes I might even do sprints up and down the driveway. So these are all elements of deliberate practice. And the same thing should be applied to the team, right? You should have and look for shared learning opportunities together. Learning together is actually quite sticky. And you may remember that, or that may ring true when you think back about, how you form friendships when you are in college or law school or any other moment in time where you are learning alongside others. It tends to be quite sticky. Those are good opportunities to build connections. So deliberately practicing together is huge here. A shared learning opportunity could be something like this. If you have attended this webinar with people from your organization, you are having a shared learning opportunity right now, right? So these things are ways to have shared learning opportunities, trainings that are offered in-house, conferences, joining bar committees, all of those are opportunities where shared learning happens. If you can't do that, or you don't have a budget for that, or it's not possible, you can create shared learning opportunities at the team level, even just having quick debriefs after you have a call to say, what did we think went well? What did we think did not go well? What did we think was interesting? My kids at the dinner table, we do what's called high, low, buffalo. And what that is what was the best thing that happened today? What was the worst thing? And buffalo is what was the most interesting or strange or unexpected thing that happened, like suddenly seeing a buffalo, right? So for this one, even if you have no budget at all, you can always do high, low, buffalo with your team. And I think that really promotes some good learning. You also, as the team leader, really want to position yourself as a lifelong learner. This is critical in order to instill a growth mindset. So presenting yourself not as a finished product, but as somebody who is continuing to learn every day, even at the high levels that you have managed to achieve, right? And I think that is one of the things that makes the profession of law so interesting, is that it is constantly evolving and changing, and the facts on the ground are shifting, and the political landscape is shifting, and everything is changing. And so you get to continue to learn, and that's part of what keeps it interesting, but really making sure that you're positioning yourself as a lifelong learner. You also want to set high but clearly defined expectations. So expect a lot from people, because the research shows that they tend to perform when you expect a lot from them. If you let them off the hook, or you have low expectations, that tends to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But you can't set them in your mind and not share them. So you have to be very clear with the team about what the expectations are. And you can even say, I know these are high expectations, but I also know that you can achieve them. So in order for deliberate practice to really work, there needs to be an awareness among team members of how to improve those skills. So they might know that they have a gap and they need to focus and improve something, but they may not know how to do that. And so one of the things that gritty, growth mindset oriented team leaders can do is really help them understand, how could I attack that? Yes, I'm having this issue with my writing. What would be a good way to address that specifically? And of course, that really requires regular feedback, right? So there has to be a constant feedback loop. The focus has to be intense. All of these things have to be at play in order to be achieved. So number 2 is deliberately practicing together. Those are some of the ways that you can do it. And then we'll go on to number 3, which is purpose. There's so much research around meaning and purpose and how important that is in order for people to be motivated, and certainly a requirement for a gritty growth mindset oriented team. The team needs to know what they are doing and why they are doing it. And it needs to be articulated not only at the beginning, but throughout. And it needs to be signaled back to. There needs to be what's called a callback to the purpose at various points along the way. That's absolutely critical in terms of maintaining grit and growth mindset on a team, right? We need to be working towards something, and we have to understand why we are doing that, right? So on the bottom of the screen, you can see there's a little trajectory here from job to career to calling. And if we treat this like a job, and if we treat our teams like they are people who are satisfying very specific things or checking certain boxes, it will feel like a job, right? And if we're better at this, if we get even better at bringing purpose into it, it begins to feel more like a career. Like, this is not just me checking the clock, right? Or punching the clock, right? This is me, actually developing a skill and committing to that over time. And at the highest level, if you incorporate purpose at the highest level, it starts to feel more like a calling. Like, this is something I'm doing and I was meant to do it, right? And so those are very, very motivating. If you can help your team members move along that spectrum from this is a job and I show up at 9:30 and I clock out at 5:30, right, to this is a calling and something that brings me great joy. The fourth one is hope, and hope is so critical for both grit and growth mindset. If you don't have hope, if you're not in an optimistic headspace, none of this will seem worth it. You will start to question yourself. You will start to question your commitment. You'll question your commitment to the team, to the task, to everything, right? So hope is critical. You have to maintain that. And one really good way to do that is to celebrate small wins. So often we're working on matters that take years at a time to complete, maybe more than that, right? And you feel like you've devoted your whole life, and then you might get a bad decision, or you might encounter a setback, or something doesn't go well. And that's hard, right? That's really hard. So it's hard to maintain focus over time if you're not taking a pause to celebrate a small win. And that can be very small, even just this call went well, or even just, I thought you delivered the portion of the call that I wanted you to address, the issue I wanted you to address really well. That was an excellent delivery. It was tight and clear and concise, and it resonated with the client. It was clear, so that is a good thing to celebrate. Or just, hey, we're at the landing, we've gotten this far. We're not at the top of the staircase yet, but we're at the landing. Let's pause. Let's congratulate ourselves, right? And that's really critical. Or an unexpected coffee. If you bring someone an unexpected coffee when they've had a rough day and say, hey, I went to Starbucks and I picked this up for you. Little tiny gestures like that go an incredibly long way. The other thing you want to do is keep focused on effort, right? So we're not just rewarding outcomes. We are focused on effort as well. And we're observing it, and we're measuring it, and we're seeing it. So I see that you worked really hard on this. It may be frustrating because we didn't get the outcome we wanted, but I saw your effort and I appreciate that. And I want to encourage you to do that again, right? That level of effort is what's going to make the difference at the end of the day. Your willingness to do it again, to go back to the effort well. You also want to sponsor and advocate for team members. So in order to maintain hope and optimism and positivity, you're going to need to acknowledge people, right? And there's two ways to do that publicly, in front of a group of people that matter, perhaps. Like, Jen took the lead on this and she did an extraordinary job. And you all should know about this. You might not otherwise, but I'm going to tell you. But also privately, as an aside, when Jen's not around, to say, hey, you should know that Jen is doing a really terrific job on this, right? So that advocacy that you can do on behalf of people on your team is really critical. It helps them maintain hope. And then, of course, you want to keep the focus on improvement, right? Everything we do is an opportunity for learning. Literally, everything we do gives us data that we can react to that helps us make things better. So, keeping the emphasis on we're here to get better. Even if we did something great, now we can make it even better than great, right? So that's an important element too. All right, we are nearing the end. This is the last prong, and then we will do the scenario live here. The last thing that we want to do, and this is the addition to the Duckworth model that felt very, very critical to me, having worked in law firms for more than 20 years now, is that we need to make sure that we're creating a psychologically safe space on our teams. and that everybody feels comfortable to bring their full selves to work, that they're not walking on eggshells, as we talked about before, but that they really feel safe to take risks, to throw out ideas that they're not sure are going to be good ones. We want them to feel like they can do that. And one of the best ways to do that is tell your own failure stories, right? Talk about a time where you didn't do something that you think you should have done and how that became a learning opportunity. And I think that can be incredibly powerful. Just being willing to position yourself, not only as a lifelong learner, which we talked about earlier, but as somebody who has made mistakes and has withstood that experience, right? There is some idea sometimes that everybody who has achieved a level of success never makes a mistake. And of course, we all know that that is not the case. You also want to make it clear that everybody matters and is needed, right? There are no, junior people on the team that are interchangeable. If anyone feels interchangeable, that's a failure, right, of management. We want to make sure that everyone feels like they matter and that they are reminded of that and they understand it. When you make decisions that impact the team, you want to be transparent, really clear, over-articulate why you're deciding. I decided to give John this assignment because XYZ. In the absence of information, people often assume the worst, right? So they may assume that it was because you don't like them or you didn't think their last draft was good enough or any other reason, right? So you want to be very clear about what you're doing and why. You want to attack the problem and never the person. We talked about this before, but I think it's so important. If there's a problem or a failure and the team is failing, that is usually not one person's fault. In 99% of the cases, it is a failure of process, not individual. And you need to really go back and do a deep dive and understand where the process broke down and how you can fix it. And the very last thing is this idea of supporting in and dumping out, which has been really helpful to me as I think about developing my own management skills. And this comes from the work of Susan Silk and Barry Goldman. It's ring theory. The idea here is really that a good team leader who's enforcing gritty growth mindset oriented principles is going to be one who offers support into the team. And when they are struggling and experiencing difficulty, they need to take that feeling and dump that outside. So they don't bring that feeling to the team. They also are human beings and they need to discuss that feeling with someone. So they need to have a circle of people that are trusted with whom they can share, hey, this is so frustrating and I've had a really tough experience leading this team and here's why. They need to process that feeling so they don't bury it. They just process it with a different group that does not involve the team members. So the support goes in as the leader, right? And the negative feelings, which are inevitable, need to find your own support, but not from the team members. So that's a more complicated idea, which we discuss a little bit more in the report, but that's a very quick look at the 5-pronged model. So Jen, I will now turn it over to you because we're going to bring Wendy into the conversation. And I'm so excited to hear from Wendy and to get to talk about these issues on a more granular basis. Let's make it a little bit more situational.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks so much for a wonderful presentation, Milana. I'd like to take this time to thank a few amazing women. I would like to warmly thank past GRIT Project co-chair and past Commissioner Lisa Dunner, current GRIT Project co-chair and Commissioner Anna Gressel, Milana, of course, Dr. Milana Hogan, as well as our Commission Chair Maureen Mulligan, especially our Commission staffer, Ashley Hill, and the GRIT Project committee members for their strong dedication and incredible work on the Gritty Team's report, toolkit, and this webinar. I am now honored to introduce Wendy Shiba, retired Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of KB Home. Earlier in her career, Wendy was Corporate Chair of the City of Philadelphia Law Department, a tenured Associate Professor of Law at Temple University School of Law, in private practice with O'Melveny and Myers, and law clerk to Justice Stanley Mosk on the Supreme Court of California. Furthermore, Wendy has served in leadership roles with innumerable nonprofits, including the ABA Commission on Women in the Profession, where she chaired the Women of Color Research Initiative. Wendy is a past president of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association and a co-founder of the Collaborative Bar Leadership Academy. Wendy has received many well-deserved awards during her illustrious career, including the ABA Spirit of Excellence Award, and most recently, the ABA Commission on Women in the profession's highest honor, the Brent Award, last year. Wendy has sponsored and mentored hundreds of men and women over the decades. I count myself very fortunate to be among them from when we served on the NAPABA board together till now. I think you would agree that Wendy has a plethora of experience in various settings from which to draw on to discuss a scenario from our Gritty Team's toolkit. I now turn it over to Wendy and Milana.
Thank you so much. I am sharing screen again here because I want to show you all the scenario so you can see it up here. I'm going to read through it quickly in case anyone is not looking directly at the screen. So this is a scenario before we begin that is taken from the toolkit. Just as Jen said, we have a library of scenarios to choose from. And if you were to offer a Gritty Teams program, you could choose from any of these. We've chosen some today. So you'll get to hear this scenario. And then we have 2 additional scenarios that we'll cover in the breakout room. So lots of choices here. But let's do this one together. So Jessica is a junior partner in a large firm in Texas. She's acting as the lead attorney on an oil dumping case. She has 2 terrific associates working with her, Tammy and John. Everyone gets along well. They have a good relationship. She wants them to feel comfortable raising issues with her, and she has done a good job of creating an environment in which they do. So on Monday, the team has a Zoom call with the client, Robert, a 76-year-old businessman who's been wildly successful. At the beginning of the call, he compliments Tammy on her pink shirt, tells her she's as pretty as a peach. Tammy smiles and takes the compliment in stride, and the call begins. The substance of the call generally goes according to plan, but on more than one occasion, Robert refers to Jessica as honey, and he often directs questions to John, even though John is a more junior member of the team. John is a quick study, and he does a great job of answering what he can and then redirecting back to Jessica. At the end of the call, Robert says to Jessica before signing off, "Thank you, dear, for all your great work. You're a gem." And after Robert drops off the call, Jessica, Tammy, and John stay on for a bit. They're debriefing. Whoops, there we go. And making fun of John a little bit, right? This guy is you know, a little nuts. You kind of can't make this stuff up. They're laughing about it and sort of bantering back and forth. And then they turn to Jessica to see what her reaction is. So now I will stop the share. And Wendy, I would love to ask you, after having heard that scenario, is this something that you've ever experienced before? Have you ever experienced something similar to that?
By my smile during it, you could probably tell my answer is absolutely. I had a very strong sense of deja vu when I heard the scenario. Now, several years ago, I was lead counsel representing a major bank, and we were at a pitch meeting for a 9-figure financing, several $100 million. And my client was a woman bank officer. She brought along a young analyst and I brought a junior associate, both of whom were men. So after my client and I explained the structure of the deal, the prospect consistently directed his questions to the 2 men. His head would literally turn as he was at the head of the table and look directly at the men. And each time he had a question, my client or I would step in to provide the answers, but he persisted in directing all his questions to the 2 men who were quite junior to my client and I.
Got it. So it sounds like you've experienced something very, very similar to this. Can I ask you to let us know how you handled it? What did you do?
Well, we handled it much like in the scenario, which is to say not very well. This was a long time ago, and my memory, but I still have a very distinct memory of it. The 2 junior men were relieved to have been bailed out when they were put on the spot. But I have to say my woman client and I really felt pretty dejected by the experience. But I am going to say that I think we both demonstrated a lot of grit and perseverance when we answered the questions with a clear and authoritative manner. Even though we didn't have a term for it back then in the 1980s when this actually occurred, it was true in my coming up in my career that women did need quite a bit of grit in order to succeed in the profession. So ultimately, the proof was in the pudding because we were awarded the deal. So that was our ultimate success in this experience. But here's what we missed. We missed the knowledge of how empowering a growth mindset can be for a team. And if the same thing were to happen today, I'd like to think that we could benefit from the shared learning experience that you've described, Milana. So at the outset, my client and I could have been much clearer during the introductions in explaining our respective roles and responsibilities. And then even though we were modeling the behavior for how to respond to questions about the complexities of our deal, the opportunity for our junior colleagues to learn was implied rather than explicitly discussed. So we could have actually applied the second prong of the gritty teams model if we had assigned a portion of the presentation to the junior people so that they could prepare and practice these skills. And then finally, thinking about the fourth prong of your model about hope, we could have cultivated a lot of optimism for the team by celebrating our success in winning the engagement, even in spite of the very difficult pitch meeting.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I love how you're weaving in the elements of the model that would be helpful. And that's exactly what we hope will happen when you all go into small groups and you're reflecting on how to deal with the new scenarios that we're going to present to you. I think this sort of way of thinking about it, these 5 prongs are helpful in this situation. Could be that 1 prong you have down, you're amazing at that prong, and 2 is the one that you could focus on, right? So for different people, different ones will be more or less valuable or more or less new and familiar to you. So I think that's, I appreciate how you've connected that so beautifully to the model. And, you know, moreover, the idea that every experience, whether positive or negative, whether you do the thing you wish you had done or you don't do that thing and you view it as a missed opportunity, is a chance to learn and improve. So even in that moment, you are reflecting that you didn't handle it the way that you would now with the knowledge that you have now. But what it does allow you to do is go back and review and learn and make a change going forward. And I think that's so critical to any team, that's kind of what you're always doing, is mining past for information and data that helps you improve upon the future. I think that's really helpful. Really quickly,
So, Milana,
I think, and John, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that one of the things I really loved about your presentation and the report was the emphasis on lifelong learning. And I think that for women who rise in their careers, as you were saying, intuitively, we have grit, even though we didn't call it grit, right? Because it's that perseverance and that stick-to-itness that allowed us to move forward, even in the face of some adversity. But what I love about your model for gritty teams, and especially the growth mindset, is that even though I think all of us probably do some elements of the model intuitively, in order to do it with intention and to really follow the model, it was helpful to me to see it all mapped out in the way that is presented in the report. And that's why I'd like to think that if I were in that same scenario today, I could approach it with a lot more intention and a lot more guidance by following the model.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly it, right? We have to be deliberate about this. We have to be deliberate about including these skills. It does not just naturally, organically happen, right? You need to be deliberate about thinking about them and how to incorporate them. I know we just have maybe 1 minute left here, but I would love to just get your views on one thing, which is, you know, John, in this scenario that I read, you know, was great. You know, I think he sort of got it. He was trying to do what he could. He was trying to redirect. He was really being an ally in that situation. In your situation, you know, what do you think is the learning for men here too? I mean, we've talked about the learning for women. We've gotten your perspective. What do you think men can learn from this as well?
Well, even though we have focused the scenarios on the experiences of women, I think there's a lot to be said for what men can take away from it. And I shared with you that when I was in a large law firm, my best buddy was a white male peer associate who was this out of central casting, this all-American, good looking, looked like a successful professional. And I used to say to him, you know, you could be any partner's, any client's son, grandson, nephew, they are pulling for you to succeed. On the other hand, I had an uphill climb to overcome some negative presumptions. I was often mistaken for a clerical assistant at the firm, or even when I was wearing my lawyer hat and it was clear that that was my hat, I would get comments such as, well, for a little girl, you certainly know what you're talking about. And that is an exact quote. So what I learned is that from sharing these experiences with my friend, who obviously had quite a bit of empathy and his own growth mindset, he began to realize that his experiences as a white man were very different from mine as a woman of color. And as he rose in his career to become the managing partner of the office of a big law firm, I know that he applied a lot of what he had learned to being a mentor and a sponsor for the women in his firm. So I really think that our male colleagues have a lot to learn from the gritty team scenarios. And I hope that when people apply them in their own workplace, they'll remember to bring the men into the conversation, because we all need male allies.
Yeah, I love that. It's such a wonderful story of a male being an important ally, and how impactful that can be when it's done correctly. And we need as much of it as we can get, for sure. Okay, so Jen, we will turn it over to you to give the instructions to everybody. We hope now you will have an opportunity to think about the scenarios and to talk in a smaller group setting about how you might use some of the tools in the model or some of the findings from the report to navigate through some similarly challenging situations.
Yes, thank you so much. Like you said, we want to be continually learning, and I know that I've learned so much just in the 10 minutes that you and Wendy have been discussing the scenario, and also Wendy's life experiences. So now for the breakout sessions, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew what we were going to be doing with the breakout sessions. So the staff will be assigning the attendees into different breakout sessions, and we're going to have 15 minutes to discuss either scenario 1 or scenario 6, which is different from the one that Wendy and Milana have spoken about. And there's going to be a Google Slides document that's going to let you see the scenario on the screen. They'll also be shared in the chat and in the Google Slide document. And please allow 30 seconds for the facilitator to join your breakout room, and they will lead your discussion. And to make the most use of our time, if you would read the scenario during those 30 seconds so that we can just start with the ball rolling at that point. And so we're going to ask for a volunteer note taker and a group member to report back when we return to the larger webinar group. And as a reminder to our facilitators, thank you so much for agreeing to be facilitators. Please don't join a breakout group when you receive the pop-up notification, and our staff will manually assign you to a breakout room so we can make sure that there's a facilitator in each